Welcome to the Payments Perspective Podcast, where we help you to navigate your payments journey one episode at a time. We bring together industry leaders to discuss timely and relevant payments topics and explore the most important issues impacting our industry. The Payments Perspective Podcast is brought to you by Wespay.
Welcome back to the Payments Perspective Podcast. My name's Jim Petkovits, Vice President of Education here at Wespay, and today I'm pleased to welcome Erin O'Donnell from the Association for Cannabis Banking. Our topic, oddly enough, is going to be banking in the cannabis industry. Erin, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your current role within the cannabis industry?
Yes, thank you, Jim. So my background is in educating financial services professionals. And with that is a strong focus on helping institutions serve higher risk industries responsibly. So I'm one of the co-founders of the ACB, the Association for Cannabis Banking. And here we do education, training, certification programs for banks and credit unions and fintechs working with cannabis related businesses. And our goal is to bridge the gap between compliance and innovation and helping financial institutions navigate those gray areas of cannabis while staying compliant.
Excellent. So this is an industry, it's not new. It feels new in some places, but it's actually been around for 13 years in Colorado and Washington. I live in Washington. We passed it here in 2012. We've learned a lot in that time. Can you tell us what some of the challenges that we still have and what are the opportunities that kind of lie ahead?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest lessons that banking infrastructure takes longer to evolve than the state legislation itself. So states are legalizing in 2012, 2013, and banks and financial institutions, credit unions didn't know how to handle that right away. So it really wasn't until 2017 and 2018 that we saw financial institutions jumping into banking cannabis in a meaningful way. And those institutions are largely community banks and credit unions. So those challenges also push the industry forward. So we've seen major innovation in payment models, compliance tools, and data transparency. The opportunity now lies in scaling these best practices. And that's difficult because each state has its own rules. So if you're banking multiple states, which a lot of cannabis banking institutions are, they're banking all over the country, you're going to have different rules in Colorado than you're going to have in Florida, than you're going to have in Oklahoma. So it's really hard to build scale when you're not all playing the same way. So that is one big challenge. The need is for standardization. Onboarding your CRBs, transaction monitoring, risk-based pricing. Different states really react to different pricing. And states like Colorado they might not actually be seeing explosive growth because their market is mature. But states like Ohio are seeing rapid growth and an upward trajectory. So it really is kind of a hodgepodge, if you will.
Sure, absolutely. One of the things we say here at Westpay, we talk about this with our boss Angie, is when you're an expert in something, you wrote the book on it, right? And Angie helped write the Fed rules for returns and adjustments with checks. But when it comes to cannabis banking, you quite literally wrote a book on it, right? So
Yes, we did. And here it is. It actually just came out this year. We were lucky enough to get Wiley Publishers to publish it. And it is really a book. It doesn't deep dive into how to set up your BSA program. It really explains cannabis at a higher level. Risk and regulatory issues, but also insurance and indigenous tribes in cannabis. So we really try to cover a lot of different aspects, and we really see it as more of an academic book than a how-to. So we're really delighted that actually Wiley came to us with the idea. They saw this as something that the market really needs.
excellent. So what are those important risks that financial institutions really need to think when they decide to enter into this industry?
The risks are really, the BSA AML exposure, because cannabis is still federally illegal. It's really tricky for banks to try and deal with that at a federal level, like with their insurance, for example, while banking it completely legally in different states. So it's very tricky, and that's one of the more unique aspects of banking cannabis. And that BSA AML exposure is really the nitty gritty regulation for cannabis. There's also reputational risk. So if we bank a cannabis CRB and they make national news and it's our bank that's with them or they're bad actors, the financial institution can't allow that to escalate. So that ongoing monitoring really helps with reputational risk. And then there's an operational burden. You've got enhanced due diligence. You must do enhanced due diligence when you're working with CRBs. And SARS filing is also its own kind of tricky thing, different thing. So, to mitigate these, most of the effective banks, they're building dedicated cannabis banking teams. We know a bank in Illinois that's a very small bank, but they have 10 BSA officers because they're banking nationwide. So knowing that you're going to have to be compliant and committing to that is really important. And then also, using tiered service models based on licensing type and transaction behavior. So you could say, I just want to bank tier 2. I don't want to bank tier 1. Tier 1 are the CRBs that actually touch the plants.
Just for the listeners, CRB, cannabis retail business, correct?
Actually, cannabis related businesses.
Related business, thank you.
Yes. Any financial institution that's looking to bank cannabis has to start with their board of directors, and they've got to start with their risk strategy. How much risk are we going to take on? Are we going to just jump in and bank tier 1, or are we going to step back and bank tier 2 or 3? And 2 or 3, like, we would be considered a tier 3, the Association for Cannabis Banking. We don't get any of our revenue from a CRB. We get it from bankers, but that's secondary. So, deciding to bank less risky companies in the seed to sale chain is also a strategy that banks can use.
So would tier 2 then sit kind of in the middle? It might be an accountant that works with them, or someone who comes in and fix the pipe, someone who gives them supplies, but not the actual plant.
Exactly. Maybe lights to grow, different types of water sprinklers to help with the grow. That would be a tier 2. And then a tier 3 would be if you're an attorney, a service provider, like we would be an education provider.
So, and each level, obviously, the further up, the higher your risk is going to be, and the more your compliance area has to be done.
Yeah, that's right.
At Wespay, within our territory, the vast majority of our states have already legalized cannabis at some level, from medical all the way up to recreational, including Colorado and Washington, which led the way. One of the things that we hear over and over again is that this is an industry that's extremely reliant on cash. And, sometimes we get the funny jokes about it, like, does the money smell? And, you know,
Actually, it does.
yeah. And that's what we say. And then sometimes that we've had financial institutions, they have to quite literally launder money, like throw it in the wash to clean it and get rid of that smell, or at least spray it with Febreze. That's a different type of laundering. What are some of the primary obstacles that this can create? Do you know of any banking solutions that might be able to help overcome those?
That's a tough lift because there is a heavy reliance on cash. We've seen PIN-based debit solutions and cashless ATM models, but Visa and MasterCard have both pushed back on those. If you go to Planet 13 in Las Vegas, it's the largest dispensary in the world, they use a cashless ATM model. I would consider that a gray area of cannabis payments, but there are other systems like closed loop payment systems that are tied to loyalty platforms. Payments is really where the problem is, in my opinion. These armored cars, people moving cash. We've heard horror stories of CRB employees, dispensary employees, who take $100,000 in cash and drive it to their bank. These are just employees. They could get robbed. It's very dangerous. So armored cars have helped manage cash, but armored cars don't go everywhere. There's a lot of states where armored cars just won't go. So this is a problem. A lot of banks actually offer their own, they work with high risk merchant processors. So when a CRB comes in to get their bank account, they'll offer that high risk payments processor to them. So the industry is coming up with their unique, ways, and we've managed to make it happen, but cash is still a huge problem.
Yeah, I remember when it first started here, and we were hearing from some of our state agencies that there were retailers or industry participants that were coming in to pay their taxes with huge suitcases full of cash. I think one of
Uh-huh.
them told me one time they actually had a guy who was quite angry about that and came in with wheelbarrows full of change. Yeah,
Like this, bank.
yeah, well, and the state's response was like, well, we will take your change if you need to, but we're going to charge you to count and roll and sort it, so it's going to be a pretty big
Yes.
processing fee.
Yeah.
And we have seen a lot of movement towards the acceptance of payment services, the ACH system in particular, to accept payments, especially at the state level. But yeah, cash still becomes a problem.
It does. And the way consumers want to pay is with their card. So we need to hear how the consumer wants to pay, and they don't necessarily like closed loop payment systems and things like that.
One more app on your phone, one more way to try and figure
Exactly.
out how to
Yeah, just
pay.
let me pay
Yeah.
for it.
So it feels like it's still a sector of an industry that's relatively underbanked. And we have members that still come to us and want to enter into that area of banking to provide that service to their customers. What would you say are some of those best practices that the cannabis industry itself can adopt to ensure transparency? And what are some of those compliance or long-term sustainabilities that financial institutions can do to make sure they offer a viable product?
A lot of times, financial institutions will rely on fintech, as we all know. There are some great platforms out there, Shield Compliance, Risk Scout, Green Check Verified. These are wonderful platforms that will help ensure. They actually track seed to sale as well. So from the time literally a seed drops in the ground, that seed is tracked through testing, through product creation, through transportation. There is transparency, and there must be in this business. So bankers are looking at many different things. They must do that ongoing transaction monitoring, but there are a lot of automations and red flag systems that allow them to do this without that much of a heavy lift.
Yeah, and one of the other things we always tell our members too is you got to start from the beginning. You got to get board buy-in, of course. You got to talk to those folks, but also to work with legal counsel. And there's lots of legal counsel out in the industry that has experience in cannabis banking. That's a really good place to start to make sure, because this is a heavily regulated area when you're getting BSA involved. You want to make sure you're dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's. So we've talked a lot about the gap between federal regulations and state regulations, and I know on a federal level there's a couple things that have been out there, the SAFE Act and the SAFER Act. Can you touch on what those could possibly mean, and what the potential of those ever moving forward might be?
Well, generally speaking, safe and safer give financial institutions safe harbor to bank. That would be a stake in the ground where federal regulations and regulators are saying, we will absolutely not come after you, period, for banking cannabis. SAFE was passed in the House. SAFER was brought out of the Senate Banking Committee, but I don't think we can get these two together. But I will say this: financial institutions have banked cannabis going on 10 years now. Nobody's gone to prison for banking cannabis. But like you said, Jim, if you kind of step out of your BSA lane, that's where you're going to get fines or sanctions or whatever. So as long as you are staying compliant in BSA, which you have to for any product. Cannabis is trickier though, but you have to for any high risk or any product at all. BSA is critical. The industry is kind of saying at this point, we don't know if safer really matters anymore, because we're doing it compliantly. The regulators have been watching this for years now, and it's working, but you must be compliant.
The BSA compliance requirements are a little bit exaggerated when it comes to the cannabis industry, but I think like any industry, if you're in violation of OFAC or BSA or AML regulations, it doesn't matter if you're selling candy or you're selling cannabis, you're going to get in trouble.
Exactly.
So,
That's exactly right. And sometimes candy is cannabis too, so that makes it even trickier.
Erin, thank you so much for joining us today. And if anyone would like to contact Erin or her organization, we're going to leave her contact information in the description for today's session. We'll also put an Amazon link to her book if you want to look a little bit more in that as well. I want to thank our members for listening in. And if you want to become a member of Wespay, you can also visit our member page. It's also available in the session description. We also want to remind everyone to subscribe to the Payments Perspective podcast, and we hope that you join us next time as we continue to work together in shaping the future of payments.